Welcome everyone to RGT. This time I want to talk about linearity in games. Linear is often a term used in a negative way when describing or critiquing a game, as I'm sure you've seen watching reviews and things like that. But as I'm sure a lot of you have experienced for yourselves, there are many different levels of linearity, some acceptable, some definitely not. Linearity doesn't always have to be a bad thing. And even if a game's linearity is a hindrance, that doesn't mean that that game can't still rise above it and reach greatness. One very good example of this kind of game is Final Fantasy X. Now, hold on, this isn't a criticism, so hold back on the hate for just a moment. Although there is a ton of extra stuff to do in this game, like extra bosses and so on, the path you take still is quite linear. Think about it for a moment. Until you get the airship late in the game, there is very little exploration to be had. The path towards the next story point is, in essence, a straight line. Obviously not literally, but if you think about it, there's very little deviation. Even the way the maps and areas are designed leaves little room for free roaming. Also, because of the nature of the game, if you were to explore and go off the beaten path, you may find yourself forced to turn back because of the strength of the enemies you encounter. So obviously the developers use that in a way to basically stop you from going in an area that you're not supposed to be in yet because there's a side quest there or a really hard boss or something. So they put hard enemies there to basically as a warning that if you can't defeat these, you shouldn't be here. So it's linear in a lot of ways if you think about it. But obviously that does not stop it from being a really great game. This game's linearity isn't even a hindrance at all, and you can't even really call it a negative aspect of the game. The linearity does not stop this title from being fantastic, or from being one of the best Final Fantasy games ever made. However, I do want to also talk about a bad example of linearity. When thinking on this topic and what games to cover, there were many games that came to mind when I was picking one for this particular one. But the one I chose to discuss is Homefront. This game is extremely linear, almost to the point where the word linear doesn't seem quite adequate anymore. The player is literally held by the hand and driven forward not by their own actions, but the actions of NPCs. You must wait for them to open doors, activate scenes, and so on. This leaves the player with no freedom or even choice at all. The rails of this strictly driven storyline must be followed, as you're unable to even open doors by yourself. Obviously, not every game needs to be about exploration, but such a slightly confined path is a little ridiculous in my view. Of course, this is my personal opinion, so if you may not agree, that's fine. As I've said before, the world would be a very boring place if we all held the same view. But still, in my opinion, this game is an example of a game being far too linear and constricted, and I feel it definitely holds the title back. This type of linearity is an understandable choice for developers, as it makes the game much easier to control by knowing exactly what the player has, like the HP, weapons, ammo, or even their position on the game map. I do still feel, though, that this is a bad choice for any game to be this restricted, as not only does it affect the player's enjoyment and experience, but it also directly affects the shelf life of the game. If the game has so little breathing room, what reason is there to replay it, or to play future DLC even? This is definitely something that needs to be considered when making this kind of choice. I can understand the choice to want your game to be linear and stuff like that, but this is to a silly level, in my opinion. If you had already played through this game, the single player I mean, why would you replay it? Why would you? There's no reason to. It's going to roll out exactly the same way every time, because of the highly scripted and linear nature of the game. I really feel like this on-rails hand-holding is something that needs to go, or at least loosen up in gaming, because this level of linearity can really hold a game back and stop it from achieving its full potential. I mean, how many games can you think of that have been spoiled, or at least made the games not quite as good that you've personally played? I can certainly think of a few. These are just two examples. I mean, I could give more examples of good and bad linearity. Good linearity would be Limbo, for example. Not going to go into that. So there's many different levels, but this level... but there is such a thing as well executed linearity. Anyway, I think I've said all I've had to say, so thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.